And what do you try to do when you're back here for the summer? What's kind of the game plan with you and the wife?
Well, we've been very fortunate this summer. We've traveled quite a bit. We went up to two times. We went down to Great Sacandaga Lake and stayed at the home of some good friends of ours. We've had 2 family reunions. And then I play golf at Bellevue Country Club, as does my wife. So we keep busy.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you get to do, and you get out, albeit the fact that it has been in the 90s up here a lot. So are there times where it's kind of just feeling like you haven't really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, especially when the humidity is 90% and the temperature is 90 degrees. That's Florida.
Yeah, it's definitely up here in central and upstate New York. There's a lot of things to get into. You and I have been on the show a lot together. This is the first time we've gotten to sit next to each other and do that. But you've had so much experience in the collegiate and professional ranks. There's a lot of stories to tell. I feel like you kind of have an endless well of those stories and whatnot. We'll get into the goings-on today, but before we go there, you were in this community and you were coaching here, and back at a time where there was a lot of success, and I'd love to maybe go back and pick.
Well, I started out in 1973. I worked at Henniger High School for 10 years, and I was assistant football coach to Tom Acey, and we were pretty damn good in the old Cities League. The 4 city schools, Auburn, Watertown, and we would travel and play Utica teams, Binghamton teams. We had a good 10-year run. Then I became the head coach at Baldwinsville, 3 and 84, and we turned that program around. And then some guy that was my assistant took it over, and lo and behold, 40 years later, he's still there, Carl Sanfilippo. And then I got to watch my son, Rocco, and Jamie. They both played for CNS High School. They both played football and baseball and were very successful. The teams were very successful during both regimes. So I got a lot of ties to Central New York.
Yeah, and with those ties that you've had here to the community, and like you said, you mentioned Carl Sanfilippo, and he's become a staple in the community. Yep. So, to still see that world and those connections and to see it over the decades just continue to, have those relationships and see their success, just what that's been for you.
Sure. And, I know Carl's work ethic is second to none. I see him once in a blue moon when I'm up here. Yeah. And I keep teasing him about, hey, it's time to hang it up and enjoy life. But he loves what he does, and he's been very successful, of course, Yeah,
and having that success, I mean, you've been a part of a lot of different pieces of success. When you were here in this community, is there a coach or two that you really feel like left an impression on you could still feel today?
Well, my high school coach, Dave McCauley, was very influential in my decisions on progressing through coaching ranks. Yeah. But when we were here in the 70s, the City League had a football league and the County League had a football league. And you had the guys like West Jennings, Pete Palin. You had Al Vetter at FM. You had Bob Adams at Auburn. Carl Bjork at Janesville DeWitt. In the city we had Jim Polla at Nottingham. Bobby Campbell was at CBA. Of course, Tom Acey at Henniger. And I'm probably missing a few people, but it was quite a talented high school coaching fraternity with a lot of good football coaches. And for you, Bob, I mean, you spent so much time in it. What got you in it? Why did you want to coach? We never talked about that. Well, I never really wanted to do anything else. I mean, like I mentioned, Coach David McCauley, when I was in Little Falls High School in 68, 69, my senior year, and, he kind of steered me in the right direction and said, you might want to learn as you learn and observe and get into the coaching profession. And like I said, I never really had any other aspirations. And once I got out of college, I jumped right in at Henniger. Tom hired me, AC, and I was the head baseball coach for 10 years. And I had stellar players. We were very, very good. We won the Section 3 baseball title in 1980.
Yeah.
But those days were very rewarding.
to have your time with Syracuse as well. Glory days were in the past, right? And a lot of the successes in the past. You and I were talking about players off the air, Rob Drummond, the Michael Owens of the world, Todd Philcox. There's so many.
Yeah, from 85
guys.
to 94.
Yeah.
When I was there for those 10 years, I mean, we could take this whole hour and just talk about all the great players.
Yeah.
No matter what the position, that we had so many talented guys. But the key to our success, and I've said this before, I'll say it now, I'll say it forever. The key to our success was the chemistry amongst all the players we had. We had several what today would be categorized as 5-star athletes.
Yeah.
But we had a multitude of what today would be considered 3-star athletes, and when you put them all together and we rode in the same direction, and everybody pulled their weight, damn, we were good. We were really good.
How do you, when you say, it all came down to that chemistry, how do you build it, how do you secure it, and how do you keep it?
Well, the first thing you have to do is have a good leader, and we're talking about the old SU right now, but I've got many of them through the years. But Coach McPherson,
yeah,
in my opinion, was a master at unifying a team of diverse cultures,
yeah,
geographical differences, color differences, size differences, family differences, and he was a master at unifying them and getting them to believe into our program. This was our program. This is how we're going to do it, and you're going to be a part of it to make us successful. And all great teams. I've been very fortunate through the years to be on a lot of great teams, work for a lot of great guys, and they all have the same talent in unifying a football program and making it one.
And you talk about all that experience working with really good people. Here with Bob Casullo, longtime college and professional coach on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, and our special No Filter is what we're calling it here because, Bob, when you've been on the show, and I've always been that way, no filter. I say what I feel. Off the air, I'm the same guy on the air, and I know you are as well.
Yep.
But you've always been so open, so candid, and so real. And that's why I felt like, of almost 19 years of broadcasting, I've never stamped those words on there, but you've never had a filter, and you've always spoken your mind, and I appreciate that.
Well, and again, I speak from experience. All these experiences I had were rewarding, and I 38 years of coaching, 40, whatever it was. I enjoyed getting up in the morning and going to work. I enjoyed all the people I worked with, players and coaches. There was a couple, that I wouldn't, I'd kick to the side of the road. I wouldn't want to be a part of, but 99% of the people, front office, administration, coaches, players, support staff, great people, and that's what you need if you're going to be successful.
Yeah, and you talked about Mac, and obviously rest in peace to Coach, and I got to finally meet him in my coverage of Syracuse, and because he was up, at times he would be up there in the press box and whatnot. The influence that Coach Mac has had on your life, how do you still feel it today?
Well, on the way made me the successful coach I was. Yeah. And it's not necessarily wins and losses, although I have many, many more wins than losses being a part of. Yeah.
We got some messages coming in here. Chris Gedney, Tim Green, Chris Jones, JJ Grant, Liverpool in the 80s. So a lot of positives looking back on that time.
The first sectional title football game, City-County, 1979. Undefeated Liverpool played undefeated Henniger at the Syracuse field there, the artificial turf field. They play field hockey there now. Manley Fieldhouse.
Yeah.
Okay, Manley Field. Place was jammed. The hill was jammed. The bleachers were jammed. We lost 14-8. We had 3 Division I football players. I think they had 5 or 6. Tim Green, Bill Pendock, Chuck Sweeney, on and on and on. And it was just a fabulous high school football game. The head coach at Liverpool was George O'Leary, and of course I was the assistant to Tom Acey. And George and I became very good friends during that year, and that's how I got to go to Georgia Tech, in 1985 or 90.
And obviously your connection to Syracuse Orange football as well as George O'Leary's, and
Yep.
I had the opportunity to.
Now there's a guy that should have been the head coach at Syracuse University.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, George, when I finally got to sit down with him, I never forgot. I mean, all the conversations we've had. When I look back on over 3,000 people that I've spoken with in the sports world, his conversations stick with me throughout those thousands of people. He's the one that sits. Yeah. And I always go back to one thing that he said, and he sat with me and he said, listen, he said, you build through the trenches, you build your team from the inside out, you go offensive and defensive line, and if you don't know that you win a championship by building in the trenches, then you shouldn't be a coach. Essentially, you should do something else.
Well, what's interesting? I always tell this story. I signed my contract at Georgia Tech on December 7th, 1994, which obviously is an easy date to remember, Pearl Harbor Day. And that first recruiting season, he pulled me aside because he was putting together a staff. He goes, look, I got this punter, and we have got to get this punter. He's the best punter in the state of Georgia. He's fabulous, and you got to get him. And I looked at him, I said, George, you're talking about a punter. I said, what's the thought process here? He says, Bob, we're going to be punting a lot for the first year or two. And that kid was Rodney Williams, and we got him, and he punted for us and kicked off for us for all 4 years.
Yeah, and we're going to get to special teams in a second here, but George O'Leary, to go back to him, he at UCF, what he was able to do and what he was able to put together, people want to talk about. And I covered UCF with George O'Leary, and toward his tail end of his career, covered it with Scott Frost, and then on from there to Josh Heupel, and now to Gus Malzahn. But when I go back to the George O'Leary time, they were told that they had no business being in the Fiesta Bowl with Baylor. Their name weren't going to beat them. They shouldn't be there. He also reminded me, he said, it seems weird that that network, and he was talking about them covering the NFL draft, he said they had a lot of packages for Johnny Manziel. They didn't seem to have anything for Blake Bortles, but he's a pretty good guy, got drafted pretty high. And statistically, and I know people don't want to admit this because, a lot of people follow the bouncing ball. When somebody tells them to follow it and they start running and a bunch of people do it, they'll sometimes follow that ball off the cliff. Blake Bortles' numbers, completion percentage-wise, what he was doing, the yardage that he had, he was on par with Mark Brunell, and he's second all-time in Jacksonville. Mark Brunell did it with Keenan McCardell, Kyle Brady, that offensive line, that defense, Fred Taylor, Jimmy Smith. Blake Bortles didn't have any of that.
Right.
And when you look at the numbers of Blake Bortles, I mean, I love the fact that George O'Leary said to me, nobody's really given any credit to my guy, but he's not that bad of a quarterback. And covering Jacksonville, covering Blake, interviewing Blake, I look back on Blake's history, and I don't think people give the credit to Blake Bortles that he deserves. And O'Leary was one of the guys that banged that drum and said, look at what this gentleman has done on my team. Like, how can you forget about him?
Yeah. The same thing happened in 1998. We went to Georgia Tech. They were 1-10. 4 years later, we were playing in the Gator Bowl against Notre Dame, and we were 10-2, and we beat them. And we were significant underdogs in that game, but our team played that team, and we beat them that day. And that's George. George knew how to do that stuff.
Yeah, and George, for you, I mean, like you said, should have been the coach here. He has connections here. It's when you look back at the people that were connected here, you got Coach P, you have, obviously Coach Mack, George O'Leary, yourself, Randy Etzel, Ed Ogeron. I mean, there's so many Coach Nick Saban. I mean, there's a lot of guys there.
Ivan Fears.
Yeah.
Nobody.
Ivan Fears,
Nobody has more Super Bowl rings than a guy named Ivan Fears that was here with Coach Mack for the whole deal. And, Clarence Brooks. There was plenty of guys with Syracuse roots, and I don't want to get into this, but you don't have to go. Let's move on.
Can we at least talk about the Coach Mac tree, though?
Yeah,
and how
sure.
beautiful that's been.
Sure, it's a great tree. I mean, apparently it's a great tree for a lot of other universities.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I hear you. I mean, just a lot. I mean, and Randy Edsall, he just decided to retire recently here.
Yes.
Randy, just an awesome guy, really fun to be around. I got to meet him when he was at UConn, and so, I got to spend some time with him there. Love that, and actually got to, be around a couple different situations, Coach P being over there, and then Randy as well. And just, to go into Randy Edsall, because I don't think that he gets the credit he deserves. What can you say about Randy Edsall as a coach and just what you've seen him do over the years?
Well, it's not only what I saw him do. He was actually with it. We were together here at Syracuse for a few years, but then we were together our last year at Georgia Tech. He was the defensive coordinator, and I was the special teams coach. And the next year I went to Michigan State, and I think that's when Randy went to Jacksonville, if I'm not mistaken, with Tom Coughlin. But anyway, the qualifications. I mean, even look at Steve Adazio. I mean, there's another one. Steve took my place when I left to go to Georgia Tech. Coach P hired him, and look where Steve's been. The tree with Coach McPherson. Kevin Rogers went to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Kevin Rogers coached. He was the quarterback coach for Brett Favre in Green Bay. I mean, on and on and on and on. There's a bunch of. There's just so many guys, and where are they? Not here.
Coach P, I believe, has tried about 700 times to retire, and every time he tries to stop, somebody calls him. What can you say to that effect? The connections. I mean, you talk about this tree that came from Coach Mac and these connections and all these wonderful coaches and people that came after and that kind of all stayed in touch. Steve Adazio has a really cool way of kind of paying it back, as Coach P hired him, and then he hired Coach P to be on his staff at Boston College. Just what you could say about the Coach P factor, because he is one of my favorite coaches, and I grew up a Coach P kid because I was really little when Coach Mac was finishing up at SU. Then I went to Coach P, and the first time I interviewed Coach P, I have described him as such. I said he's a guy who looks at you and you apologize.
Good. He knew he had a good football staff.
Yeah.
When he first took over, and I remember Coach Mac coming up to me and saying, "We went 10-2 and 10-2 the first 2 years." And I remember Coach Mac. We were having coffee one day, and I know the place. I can't think of the name of it. And he said, he goes, "Bob, if I was here, we wouldn't be 20-4. It was time for me to leave." And that was to me, that was very perceptive. That Mac knew it was time to move on. You know what I'm saying? And Paul came in, full of vim and vinegar.
Yeah.
And he hired a great staff. Our first 2 years, I want to say, of the 9 coaches, 5 of us went to the NFL at some point in time. So Paul was very good. And George DeLeon, God rest his soul, he just recently passed away.
Yeah.
But George did the offense, Paul did the defense, and we all did our jobs. We all recruited our tails off. We all did our jobs. And that's rowing the boat in the right direction, okay, and having the right chemistry.
And George DeLeon, I mean, you just, obviously said passed away here recently, and may God rest his soul. I'd love to hear your take on Coach DeLeon, to the people that knew him and to some of the people that didn't.
The mad scientist. George was in his element, in his office with the door locked, drawing plays, watching film, and then getting on the field and working with the linemen. And of course, he called the plays all those years on offense. George was. By the way, one thing that I don't think very many people know about him, he was a fantastic. What do they call these guys? You would put on a '60s song.
Yeah.
George wouldn't even look up, and he'd go, "The Beatles, 1964. I want to hold your hand." And you would go like, "George." It was so out of character for him, but he was a music buff. he was an old-time music buff, and we used to laugh at it because it wasn't his character, you know what I mean? And we would pick songs that maybe were one-hit wonders, and he would get it, Papa Beep, sung by Bobo in the year Kiki, and you're like, oh, you know? So they're good people.
I think it's interesting how you described his personality, because I asked some people that were around Coach DeLeon at Syracuse, and I said, you know, what would you do when he smiled? And they said you would be terrified as to like what was going to happen next.
Yeah, you're right. They were right.
So here with Bob Casullo, No Filter, Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, on site, on location at the Wildcat Sports Pub. We're here every single month. We do a lot of work with West Genesee Athletics. Shout out to the Wildcats, and very happy to be here with Bob Casullo. One of your children is connected to West Genny, and I would love for you to share your thoughts on that connection, and obviously when you come back to this community, that you are still rooting for another Casullo right here in Central New York.
Well, Jamie, a few years ago, about 5-6 years ago, was the head coach at West Hill High School. And then he left there, and he went to Coach Joe hired him at West Genesee, and I think Jamie's been there 3 years now, and he absolutely loves it. He loves working with Joe. He loves the coaching staff. More importantly, he loves the players, and they do a great job. You know, I go back and forth in the fall between here and Florida to see my other son Rocco coach, and it's always interesting to see these guys. You know, how they are on the field, how they are with the players, how they do adjustments, and I'm proud as hell of them, and I keep telling them to make sure, above everything else, make sure the players have fun. That's the most important thing. And Jamie up here, I was hoping he'd be with us tonight, but him and his wife took a week vacation, and they dropped off the kids to Grandma and Grandpa, both sets of grandparents, and they're out down in Florida enjoying the sunshine, the hot weather, and the beach. So, but Jamie, I watched West Genny, and I remember scrimmaging them years ago when Pete Palin was the coach with those Notre Dame gold helmets and the blue jerseys. It's a very good program that Coach Joe has put together.
When you have that lineage yourself, you know, we talk about the Coach Mac tree, but when the Casullo generationally continues that tree of coaching, what does that do for you as a dad?
You know, proud is not even a strong enough word. Like I said, Jamie was at West Hill, and they were very successful. He comes here and helps Coach Joe with his staff, and they've been very successful. And my son Rocco is one of the top. This is not me saying it. This is, I mean, you're in Florida, so you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. How revered high school football is in the state of Florida. And in South Florida, Rock is always mentioned as one of the top 3 coaches in South Florida. You know, between St. Thomas, and then he went down to Mater Academy in Miami, and now he's at Cypress Bay, which is the largest public high school in South Florida. And, you know, he's bringing them back. They were 7-3 last year. And, you know, Jamie, they were in the playoffs with West Genesee last year. So one thing you don't know at the time when they were growing up, because I was immersed in my jobs, but they obviously paid attention. And they learned a lot without me directly telling them, but they learned a lot on how to do things, you know, recruiting, talking with kids, talking with parents. And that's what I think their strong points are. And again, I tell them, you know, take care of the kids. You know, when things went south for me here, there was a false story that made the rounds about me and Rob Long. Me and Rob Long to this day text each other and communicate with each other. You know, and you get the media, you get some jokers that don't know what they're talking about, and they ruin it for you. You know, because the general public, like people sitting out here, they don't know any better. They rely on the media for factual information, which they didn't get. And, you know, I look like a bad guy, and that always hurt. And, you know, it hurt my family, hurt my sons. But they know. They know. You know, they know how I was with kids, and I know how they are with kids. And that's why It's called chemistry, making it all work.
Yeah, and you mentioned texting Rob Long to this day, and somebody I've built a professional and personal relationship with as well. Love, his fight, love his determination, everything that he has done. So what are some words to describe Rob Long and to set the record straight? Because,
well, first of all, Rob Long should have been in the NFL.
Agreed.
Unfortunately, the way my end came, I was unable to pull a lot of help for him, communicating with people. I was kind of persona non grata, and then down the road, people were saying, whatever happened to Rob Long? Whatever happened to Rob Long? And I'm, coaching 10 years special teams in the NFL, for most of that time, trust me, I can identify an NFL kicker. I can identify an NFL punter. Yeah. I can identify an NFL skilled player in the kicking game. And that kid deserved to be in the NFL. And like I said, I wasn't privileged to be here to help him, so I have no idea what happened.
Yeah, and just wonderful when we look at special teams and whatnot. And you have made your hay and spent so much time in that world, a world that is not often spoken about, right? You hear about offense a million times. You hear about defense. Everybody wants to have the flashy offense. Then you got to have the defense to try and stop that scoring and whatnot. But very rarely do we hear about special teams, which I find hysterical in the sense of the fact that special teams determines where your opponent starts on the field, and it determines where you start. So when you talk about, the line of scrimmage, when you talk about where you are, when you talk about how short your field's going to be and how short their field's going to be or how long it's going to be, special teams is directly responsible for how long of a field your defense has to defend and how short of a field your offense has to score. So I'd love for you to give your thoughts on special teams, because we don't talk about how special it is, and that pun is good.
Here's two examples. Green Bay Packers last year in the championship game to go to the Super Bowl. Yeah. How did they lose that game?
Yeah,
special teams got crushed. I mean, they were embarrassed, absolutely embarrassed, and the game went down to the wire. Yeah. It shouldn't have even gotten down to the wire. They should have won that game going away. Special teams killed them. And at the end of the year, they get rid of their coach. They bring in my buddy Rich Bisacci from the Raiders, who should have still be the head coach of the Raiders. Okay? And then the next example is last year, 2 years ago, Syracuse University football, from what I understand, had one of the top special teams units in the ACC, and that particular coach left, and they never replaced him with a special teams coach.
Yeah.
So they divvied it up last year, and the results were quite the opposite from the year before. So those are two examples of how important special teams are. I know when John Gruden hired me in 2000, going through the interview, and he said, look, we were 8-8 this past year, okay? And 4 of the 8 games we lost, we should have won, but the special teams cost us. You know what we went my first year at the Raiders? 12-4.
Yeah.
So we made up those 4 games.
Well, and you just mentioned it, and it boggled my mind last year that any team could lose a coordinator of any of the phases and not replace. How do you, I understand some head coaches try to be the offensive coordinator, be the defense coordinator, but you said, here's 2 prime examples, Green Bay and Syracuse, and you're 100% correct. And living in the Syracuse one in reality, when they lost their special teams coordinator and they did not replace it, it was one of the worst seasons ever. Syracuse is known for punters passing the baton and another good punter coming up. None of the 3 punters could do it. And I remember last year Dino saying, because there was one of the punts that was shanked and it went 8 yards and there was a penalty, so it was only like 3 yards or something like that. But it goes shanked, it goes right out into the stands. And he said, well, you don't understand, that's a specialty punt. And I said, I guess a punt that goes 8 yards and shanks is pretty special in its own right. But, you brought it up, and I love it because when all last season, people complained about special teams, And then you sit there as a broadcaster in my seat, and I say, well, there's no coordinator. And people look at you and you go, and they're like, what do you mean? I said, there's nobody there to run it. And they're like, well, I said, and look at how much it fell. You say special teams doesn't matter, some people out there. And when you don't have a coordinator overseeing it, would you run an offense without a coordinator? Would you run a defense without a coordinator? So, I mean, great example.
And again, I think he rectified the situation. He hired Bob Ligashevsky.
Yeah,
I know Bob. I coached against Bob in the NFL. So obviously he brings a wealth of experience here.
Yeah.
But what you got to do is, the reason you have to have somebody run it is because you have to have somebody be accountable for what happens. If you split it up amongst the coaching staff, the defensive back coach, he's more concerned. He's walking to the special teams meeting and he's thinking about his DBs. You know, the wide receiver coach is going and he's thinking about his wide receivers. You have to have somebody that has to answer to the success or failure of special teams. And, you know, George O'Leary was big at that. He says, I'm going to come to you. I don't want... You know who my assistant was for special teams? George O'Leary. George was my assistant.
Yeah.
He said, I don't want anybody else touching it. It's you. It's your ass on the line, and I'm going to help you. And he would. I told him what to do. And we ran the practices, me and him. Nobody else.
Yeah.
We had the graduate assistants spotting the ball. We had the graduate assistants holding the cards. And him and I coached, you know, he had one side, I had the other side, and away we went. That's the way to do it, you know?
Well, and I think, you know, when you see it now, running backs coach, special teams coordinator, and whatever else they put them in, tight ends and whatnot. Like you said, you're gonna do the job that you're meant to be there for.
Well, now when they added the extra coach, okay, I assumed everybody's going to hire a special teams coordinator. No, they go get a right-handed cornerback coach for the left-handed cornerbacks. Some teams go and get the interior defensive line coach. So now they got two guys to coach four. There's a lot of dumbness in college football. If they're handing you a 10th position, and again, now there was a lot of teams that hired a full-time special teams coach, okay, because that's what it was meant to be. But no, they have to have an offensive coordinator and a quarterback coach. Come on, people. There's two guys in the room. You know?
I just got a thing from Jim Jerome, who said, I knew you were tough, but did not know you were Casullo tough. A whole new respect. So thanks to Jim Jerome for that. Jim's been on the show. But, yeah, I was like, I reached out. I don't even remember how many years ago it was, but I reached out to you, and like with anybody else, I just love meeting people, connecting with people, wanted to tell your story. And from the first time we spoke, you've been so well-versed. I don't tell you ahead of time, like, here's all the questions. I don't do that with anybody. Like, here's what you need to know. And you're able to talk about anything. You're passionate about stuff. You're real about it. And you go where you want to go, and I appreciate that so much because, you know, that's why it's called No Filter, because you have very strong opinions and you give factual statements. And I tell people all the time, there's two things I ask on my show. Be respectful and justify your opinion.
Yep.
And that's all I want. I want to hear what you have to say without screaming about, you know, swearing at people and whatnot. But I want to really get your thoughts, and I love how you've been so real about it, because it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and there's things that happen. There's hirings, there's firings, there's movements, there's things you want to see change. So I love that you brought up when the 10th opportunity was there, that you really wish that there was a special team side to it.
No, absolutely. And, you know, and I work for some great guys. You know, obviously we talked about Mac and Paul, but I go to Michigan State. I go to Georgia Tech. I work for George O'Leary. He appoints himself my assistant. From there, I go to Michigan State, okay? Let me tell you something. When you coach special teams, period, during the practice, the teams that weren't, all the players that weren't involved were on the sidelines, okay? And Nick was on the field. I ran the show, and a couple of other coaches that would help me, but it was important. And we beat Notre Dame, blocked punt. You know, here's an interesting story. The first special teams play, I'm at Michigan State. We're playing Oregon on Thursday night national TV, okay? And they're going to punt to us, and I call a return. And Gary Scott was our punt returner, okay? And I call a right wall return. Well, Nick, he turns to me, the play's in, he turns to me and he goes, "What'd you call?" I said, "Wall right." "No, I don't want to run wall right." Well, meanwhile, the ball's in the air and he's calling timeout.
Yeah.
But the ball's in the air. Gary Scott catches the ball, runs down the right side, and gets pushed out of bounds on the 3-yard line. That was my first special teams call at Michigan State. And, you know, I don't want to say Nick apologized because he would never do that, but it was a tenuous year. But it took me, you know, a game or two to get on the, Nick and I were on the same page. And he became more and more hands off in the game day operation, you know what I mean? But he was involved in everything.
You know, you have Coach Mack, Coach P, George O'Leary, and, you know, John Gruden, as you mentioned, Nick Saban,
Mike Holmgren.
I mean, you're a very spoiled coach, in my opinion.
You know who the greatest one of them all is?
Go ahead.
By far.
Yeah.
Ain't even close.
Yeah.
Al Davis. By far. I learned more in 4 years from Al Davis, and I say to my wife will tell you this, my sons will tell you this, I revere that man. If I'd have been involved with Al Davis early in my career, there's no doubt that I would have been a head coach somewhere, some level, for a long time. In those 4 years, I picked his brain. The man was a flat-out genius. He was so far ahead of his time, it wasn't even funny. So, yeah, I worked with a lot of great guys that I respect, and each one of them had their own strengths that I observed. But the one man that ran the show, I mean, A to Z, you know, president of football operations to the custodian that mopped the floors at night, Al Davis. He knew it all. And every Tuesday night during the season, he would come into my office and sit down with me, and we'd go over personnel for special teams. He wanted to make sure I had enough personnel. And a lot of times there was a couple instances in the 4 years where the head coach wasn't happy because they didn't want a particular guy. They wanted an extra lineman, or they wanted an extra linebacker. They wanted an extra wide receiver, a guy that couldn't play special teams. And Al Davis said, no, we need a core of 66 guys, and we ain't losing any one of them. But that's just an example. The man knew everything. He was, you know, I put, you know, we talk about my feelings about Mac, you know, Nick, George, Paul, all these guys, John Gruden, Mike Holmgren, put Al Davis above him. And I don't apologize for doing that one bit.
You said if you got involved, and we're here with Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, on site, on location every month. We come here and do specials at the Wildcat Sports Pub. A lot of work with the West Genesee Wildcats, and these features that we get to do, like No Filter with Bob Casullo. And, of course, you're with us every Monday through Friday in our normal schedule times, in our morning broadcast of Wake Up Call Monday through Friday, weekly from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Time on mixlr.com, facebook.com, and youtube.com/Wake Up Call DT. And then, of course, all of the podcasting platforms you can have the archive shows from, as well as wakeupcalldt.com. So proud to be here at the Wildcat. Shout out to Danny and Heather Tome and the entire team here. You said early on in your career, if you had gotten involved with Al Davis sooner, there's no doubt you would have been a head coach somewhere for a long time. Why do you say that?
Because his brilliance was in creating the Oakland Raiders, okay? He created them. And I had this discussion with him throughout the years, and how he created them, what the priorities were, what should be done first, what should be done second, what should be done third, fourth, up, all the way down the line. What do you look for when you hire this type of person for this type of job? How do you put the players together? He he was so thorough and so far ahead of. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that the other guys, the other head coaches, were not thorough. They were very thorough. Yeah. Mr. Davis took it to a different level. Trust me, he took it to a different level because a lot of those guys, somehow, some way, somewhere in their lives, they learned from what Al Davis taught people that filtered. His knowledge just kept permeating through the ranks. You know what I mean? Yeah. So when I tell you, I'm not demeaning the other guys at all, but I'm kind of putting him on a pedestal where he belongs. And like I said, I wish I met him and worked for him a lot younger. And whenever my wife will tell you, my kids will tell you, whenever I hear anybody speak wrongly about him, my first question to them is, when did you work for him to form this opinion? Well, I never worked for him. Well, where are you coming up with all this crap? What are you talking about? Again, it's reading things that they have no clue. The person writing it or saying it has no clue what they're talking about, and they're just, that's their knowledge. That was their knowledge of Al Davis. And I say, stop. Look, you want to talk like that? Go ahead, but don't talk to me like that, because I lived with the guy for 4 years. I picked his brain. He knew what I was doing. And he was happy at that time in his life to share a lot of knowledge and experiences, But like I said, I was on the downside of my career, and I just made the most of it from there on out.
And so many people, you bring it up, when I hear Al Davis, I also think Jerry Jones, because of how things are painted, right, in the media and the public, of two guys that you typically hear like they were too involved, they try to have too much control, they're doing this or doing that. Like you said, when somebody speaks about Al Davis, in your opinion, wrongly, you always say, well, when did you work for him? What are some of the beliefs that are out there about Al Davis that you would want to debunk?
He was as kind to my family as anybody I'd ever worked with. And I can give you several examples. But if you were a loyal Raider and he recognized you as a loyal Raider, you then had him in his corner. He was in your corner. You know what I'm saying? And believe me, when you hear about the Raider way and the Raider family and the Raider nation, that's real. That's real. Trust me. Now, don't ask me about Mark Davis, okay? But I'm talking about Al Davis. If you were a Raider, I'm still a Raider. I almost wore my Raider shirt tonight, but I didn't want you asking me Raider questions, and here you are asking me Raider questions. But the man...
You brought up Al Davis, not me.
The man, what they're missing is you have to be able to sit down and listen to him and become a sponge and just absorb. Willie Brown told me when I first went there, the great Willie Brown, Hall of Fame guy, he said to me, don't lie to Mr. Davis. If you don't know the answer, say, Mr. Davis, I don't have that answer right now, but by the end of the day, I will get back to you. And then here's the kicker. That'll work once, Willie said, but it'll never work again. So basically what he was saying was, you had to be in Al Davis's mind. You had to know what he was saying. I can't tell you how many times he would come into my office and he would sit there and he would go, how'd our guy do this week? And I'm sitting there saying, oh, geez, who's he talking about? So I would immediately rattle off Janikowski, Leckler, the long snapper, the returners, our leading tacklers. So I covered the whole gamut of it. Well, that was what he was alluding to. Yeah. But he didn't want to say, hey, how'd everybody do? He'd go, how'd our guy do? Now, did he ever say to me, well, which one of those is the guy? No, he never said that. But I covered all my bases,
And you can't be wrong.
No, and that's what he wanted. That's what he wanted. But you had to know what he wanted. And let me tell you something. when he asked you a question, because I saw guys that were BSing him.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that. You don't want to do. When we had our draft meetings and he asked you about a player, a college player, you damn well better have the answer, and because he wanted to make sure you did your homework.
Did you ever see somebody get fired on the spot for lying to him?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. We had a situation where we had an open week. I won't mention any names. You probably wouldn't know the guys anyway. And we were it was our last year, which was a cluster, whatever, you know. It wasn't a good year because of the leadership. But anyways, we had an open week before we played the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the GM at the time was Bruce Allen. And Bruce Allen, I remember knocking on the office door. He says, "Don't plan anything at 1 o'clock. We got a meeting with the boss." You never had a meeting with Al Davis. Individually, he would meet with you.
Yeah.
But you never had a staff until the draft came. Then you were all together. So at 1 o'clock, we go into the meeting. Well, somebody lit a fire under his butt because he was on fire. And his main contention was, if you remember Al Davis, you read about him, okay? The vertical pass game down the field was his baby.
Yeah.
And the two guys that were running our offense were horizontal guys, you know, crisscrossers, out in the flat, hooks, short hooks. And without using the salty language, he basically said, "I don't want to see any of that crap. I want the ball to go down the field." Do you understand? We go to Pittsburgh. It's a back and forth game. They scored go ahead by, I think, 4 points. We run back to kickoff. I'll never forget it. Terry Kirby, dear friend of mine, lives in Miami. I see him all the time. We ran a middle wedge. He took it 99 yards right up the middle. We go ahead. We should have killed the Steelers that day. We were like 23 for 35 passing for like 180 yards. He was livid. We lost the game because they didn't throw the ball down the field. We had Jerry Rice, and Tim Brown. Okay?
Yeah.
So we're on the plane flying home. It was ugly. It was ugly. The gentleman involved got fired on the airplane.
That's got to be a weird place to fire somebody.
Well, let me
tell you. Because you got to sit in 30,000 feet together for how long?
Let me tell you something. You never saw the coaching staff's heads all go down like a tortoise in a shell because none of us wanted to be a part of that.
I'm going to, before we get to our final piece, I'm going to ask you this because you brought up Al. So
since that's what you got me here with.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things that are going on in college football right now. And I feel that every show that we do together, and I call it No Filter for a reason, we always end up going to a million places. And so name, image, and likeness is here. There is little to no regulation. There is no central ruling body. The NCAA is trying to figure out who they are, trying to figure out their transformation, their constitution. The president is stepping down. He said he had no control over college football at the beginning of the pandemic. So Mark Emmert, my response to that was, well, then what are you getting paid for? So there's all of these things going on in the background of the NCAA. California passes a law. I think 9 states at the time had passed some type of a law. And then the NCAA, I don't know how they had the jurisdiction to do this, but they told all 50 states, you have to let this go this year, even though you have no laws in place. And name, image, and likeness came out with no restrictions. States can do what they want. Collectives have been formed. And now boosters and all these illegal things that used to not be able to happen legally are now happening legally inside of the NCAA. And there's a lot of issues, and you can't really put Pandora back in her box. And I saw a lot of things ahead of time. You can check the tape and go back and check me on that. But a lot of the things I warned about are happening right now.
Well,
so
what they did was very simple. Lane Kiffin addressed it at the SEC meetings. They legalized cheating. What has been going on for years, they have now legalized. They've covered their bases on several things. They've legalized cheating because they didn't have a handle on it.
yeah.
Okay? That's the first thing they did. The second thing they did was they've now found a way to pay the players, which I don't disagree with. I disagree with the process. Now, There's three things I want to say about NIL. The first thing is the name, image, likeness. Repeat that. Name, image, likeness. Who on God's earth sat there in a room with these cheaters that were cheating, and they say, we got to legalize this so everybody can have a chance at it, but we got to come up with a name that everybody will buy. So they come up with name, image, and likeness. Are you kidding me? That guy should get a medal. That's the greatest con job in the history of sports. Okay? Now, the next things are, there's two questions that should be, as men here, a piece of paper, we say down, write down how many teams in college football can win the national championship. They'll get to probably they'll get to 3, maybe 4, possibly 5, and after that, they're done. Okay?
Yeah.
So, all they've done with this NIL is, okay, if you can't answer those two questions, you can't compete. Because what happens now, the guys that were cheating, okay, and that wanted to legally pay the athletes, they figured it out. Let's let everybody cheat. Well, now you're going to have all the rest of the people trying to figure out how to pay athletes while these guys have been doing it for years and they're going to the next level. It's comical. It's sad. And you started out by talking about what is the NCAA. I was in college football for 18 years. There is no NCAA. It's the athletic directors. It's the presidents. You know, and it's what. Furthermore, how are you going to have these things, this super conference, without Notre Dame?
Yeah.
Who's going to force Notre Dame to go into a conference?
Well, there's one easy way to do it, in my opinion, and it's for the College Football Playoff Committee to determine that you cannot qualify for the College Football Playoff unless you are a member of a conference.
What if NBC says to Notre Dame, we don't care about the College Football Playoff, we are going to sponsor you and support you because we do that and we're going to continue to do that.
Right.
You know, so Notre Dame has to make the decision, well, do we want to lose guaranteed NBC money to go into something, and if you think they're one of the 4 teams, you're making a serious mistake.
Yeah, they're not.
Next thing.
Yeah.
Okay? Next thing. Switch over to transfer portal.
Yeah.
Okay? One question for transfer portal. Mm-hmm. And this
college free agency.
College free agency. Okay? Whatever happened to graduation rates?
Yeah.
So when you start talking about this stuff, it's phony. It's all crap. It's a whole new level. It's all different. And schools like Syracuse and Indiana and New Mexico and Texas Tech and Illinois, Duke, they're done. They're done. I mean, what are you going to do? How are you going to compete in NIL for a quarterback that before he steps on campus is making $1 million?
Yeah.
There's probably not a coach at any one of those colleges making $1 million other than the head coach.
Yeah. If that's even happening in some of these places. And no, I mean, you bring up a great point, and the transfer portal, which essentially uses NIL, and I love how they say NIL was not supposed to be used in order to entice somebody in recruiting. And I said, okay, but there's no restriction on that. And the collective in Miami, I believe it was Miami when I was at the ACC kickoff, I think it was Mario Cristobal that said it, but he said, we're looking for, he's called it right out. He said, we want our boosters to donate to the collective, give money to the collective. And I sit here and I say to myself, all the collective is a bunch of illegality with boosters that can now pool their money together, give it to the university and say, here's $9 million. Decide if you're going to go get 3 players with that for football, if you're going to get 2 basketball players and 5 football players, if you're going to use some of it this year but most of it next year because the quarterback next year is going to cost a couple million. But all the collective is now is a bank account to just fund recruiting, which is not what it was supposed to be.
Well, and then you also got schools like Syracuse and Duke, to use for examples, Kentucky being another one, where their basketball programs are their powerhouses.
Right, the bread and butter.
So if you're gonna go out and get a group, okay, to raise money for NIL, are they going to give it to basketball or are they going to give it to football? Because if they think they're going to give it to athletics, these places are going to spread it around. You go to Alabama, there ain't no spreading the money around, boys and girls. You know what I'm saying? You go to Georgia, you go to these schools, LSU, there ain't no spreading the money, folks. Okay? Here's where the money's going. It's going to football. You want to get a basketball program going, you create your own slush funds, whatever they call them. So the disparity will widen. And the schools now that really have a limited chance, go back to look at Cincinnati. Dream year. Okay? They come out with these rules, even if Cincinnati wanted to jump into the fray. How much funding do you think the University of Cincinnati can raise, okay, to slush fund, that's what I call it, a football program, as opposed to their next door neighbor, Ohio State? They got one guy at Ohio State that probably is going to give more money to Ohio State than everybody combined would give to Cincinnati. You know what I mean? It's a joke. It's sad. It's sad.
Bob Casullo here. Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora. Final point inside of the Wildcat Sports Pub, 3680 Milton Avenue in Camillus, New York. We're here every single month. And, of course, Wake Up Call is your morning show every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Time on mixlr.com, facebook.com, and youtube.com/WakeUpCallDT in Central and Upstate New York and worldwide. Bob, you brought NIL seamlessly into the transfer portal, which will now seamlessly go into college realignment because it all comes down to the money. Now, the SEC has remained true to being in the South. So from Texas to Florida and up to Kentucky, we have a circle here. And I actually have done a lot of realignment shows. One of them I did a map so you could see it. And I did what it was, what it is, and what I think is going to happen in predictions. So you see the SEC map. Above that SEC map, touching each other, the Big Ten touching the SEC with the Midwest to the northeast side there and taking that. Then they jumped out to California. I think the American Athletic is going to continue and the Sun Belt's going to continue because they took a page out of the SEC book, and most of these states and the areas that the SEC is in, the American and the Sun Belts have gone into to take those markets. So smart. But we see the Big Ten and what they've done, and now they've reached out to California. You talked about Olympic sports and these things, people talk about they don't generate a lot of money, and people don't give them a lot of credit. And without this ESPN Plus and these different networks for conferences, they wouldn't even be televised, which is sad. But the question is Penn State going to bus, charter jet? What are they going to do with their field hockey team? What is USC going to do with their volleyball team when they have to go and play Ohio State? The SEC is at least staying true to an area, but the Big Ten now has just really blown the door open on it, and the Big 12 keeps toying with, or at least making you think that they're going to take from the Pac-12, which means that the Midwest Conference that the Big 12 used to be is now going to be stretching out west. So, your thoughts on realignment and the fact that I think the only way the Pac-12 stays alive is if they bond with the Mountain West. There's immediate rivalries, and it's the only part of the country that's still wide open outside of USC and UCLA. But we talk about the money, we talk about super conferences, and the SEC, I already thought a year ago, was going to form their own league. The Big Ten's trying to go and do that as well, go with them, in my opinion, and everybody else is left open. The head of the Big 12 is gone. The head of the Pac-12 has been cut off. The SEC and the Big Ten are more powerful, and the ACC is just sitting there watching, which I think is a very dangerous plan. So wherever you want to take it, you have the floor.
Well, first of all, it's gonna happen. It's being created, therefore it's going to happen.
Yeah.
There's going to be two factions. There's going to be a super conference, and then there's going to be everybody else. And what I don't want to see is, let's say there's 64 super conference teams, and there's 64 next level, AAA, whatever you want to call it, teams. Okay? I would say make sure, and they're not through with this yet, because the SEC, if they're going to make a true super conference, all right, how do you keep Vanderbilt? You don't. You know
and I think they're going to go to 20, and I have my list of schools that I think they're going to go after.
Whatever.
Yeah.
There's my point is there's still another step involved of disassociating teams.
And do you think? I mean, that's something that hasn't happened a lot. We saw Temple do, or we saw the Big East do it to Temple, and then take them back when Steve Addazio was there. But do you think that it is diplomatic at this point for some conferences to say, for the SEC, for the SEC to say, hey, Vanderbilt, for the Big Ten to say, hey, Rutgers? I mean, is it fair for them to say, you're either not going to be here, or we're going to do our grant of rights and we're going to tier it, and you're going to be on the bottom tier, and you're going to make a third or a fourth of what everybody else is going to make?
You can't call it a super conference if you're going to involve some of those teams. I'm sorry. You just can't. You just can't. Because Vanderbilt would fit in very well with Syracuse, Duke, Virginia, Boston College.
Rutgers is,
let me say this to you. What that guy Greg Schiano's doing down there right now,
you think it's going to get better?
They ain't looking. The Big Ten's not looking to get rid of Rutgers. Trust me. They'll get rid of other teams before they get rid of Rutgers.
But maybe a Maryland.
Maryland could be a possibility. You substitute a Notre Dame for a Maryland. I don't think that's going to happen because Notre Dame don't want to go to the Big Ten, and the Big Ten really don't want Notre Dame. But anyways, my point is, there's going to be pluses and minuses. There's going to be disappointments. I'm just a guy with an opinion, but I know one thing: if you can't call a conference a super conference, if you're keeping certain football teams, you can't do it. You can't do it. And the rest of the teams go out. Like I said, if there's 128 Division I teams or 135, have 68 super conference teams and have 68 of the best of the rest. Okay? And let them have their playoffs, and let the super conference have their playoffs, and everybody's got what they want. And it becomes TV money. I mean, you look at Syracuse University and the ACC teams, they all made, $23.5 million. Meanwhile, the Big Ten made twice that, and ACC made more than that. Well, let me tell you something, folks. The ACC's never going to make more than that. Okay? The AAC's never going to make more than what they have. You work with the best what you got. And there is no easy solution, but don't start talking about super conferences that include a Vanderbilt and a Duke. You know what I'm saying? Don't do that. Don't do it. And you look at Northwestern, and I think Pat Fitzgerald is one of the top 5 coaches in the country. Okay? But Northwestern can't hold up. How could you beat Northwestern? Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, Miami, Alabama, if they have a super conference. Yeah. This could be your schedule. This could be your schedule.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So they can't do that. The school's not. But Northwestern can play Syracuse. They can play Illinois. They can play New Mexico. They can play Iowa State. There's a lot of teams they can play, but they can't play a murderer's row for 11 games. They can't do it. Neither can, and I don't want to say anything about Syracuse, but they're kind of in that boat too. Because go back to the questions I asked you about the NIL. Yeah. If you don't have the talent, to get to the Final Four, what are you going to do to get there? So that you can get to the Final Four. What are you going to do to fix it? Yeah. Pittsburgh, Boston College, Connecticut, Indiana. What are you going to do to fix it? Wyoming? How are you going to? You want to be in a super conference? You're just going to be cannon fodder. You know what I'm saying? It's. Anyway, that's my opinion. I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, the way I see it going right now is 3 tiers at this point, and the SEC would have its own league. Maybe the SEC and Big Ten would have their own playoffs and then play each other with their champions at the end. The second tier would be everybody left of the FBS, and the third tier would be the FCS. So that's how I see it right now as it shakes out. But I don't think we're done. I think more moves are to be made. And I told people I don't believe in coincidences ever. And 2025, 26 are when most things are changing. In 2025, Notre Dame's deal is up with NBC. 2026, the college football playoff deal is up, and they got to figure out what they're doing. 2024, we're supposed to, see USC and UCLA go to the Big Ten. 2025, we're supposed to see Oklahoma and Texas. So around that time period of 2025-26, that's when I think everything's going to finally find its footing. But there's no coincidence that all of these major dominoes are going to be falling at the same time.
And the ACC's contract is up when?
2036.
Why did they do that?
To protect themselves.
There you go. To guarantee schools like Syracuse getting $23 million a year, whether they go 1-10 or 10-1. So you reap what you sow. You know what I'm saying? Now the question is, well, supposing the super conferences wanted a Syracuse, how do they get out of the ACC?
Right.
Well, you know what? You sold your soul to the devil. Look at Clemson, Florida State, and Miami. How are they getting out? Now, if they get out, it's over. It's over. The ACC is done.
And I think there's a shot that they might get out. So we shall see as we step forward what'll happen, but we definitely will be talking with Mr. Casullo about it here. Bob Casullo, shout out to Rocco, Jamie, and the entire family. The last thing I'd love for you to say here is we've talked about all these things with your family and all these sports, but you have a wife that you get to celebrate life with.
Yeah.
So can we shout her out for a minute?
Pat, my wife Pat, let me tell you something. She knows more about football than I would say 50% of the guys that are on TV every Saturday and Sunday. She's good. And when we sit down and watch Yankee baseball games together and the Mets games, she goes, Bob, I think the Mets might be better than the Yankees. She, you always hear the stories about the guys, the wives divorce them because they're married to sports. Mine's the opposite. My wife is married to sports, and sometimes I say, who did you marry? But she knows her sports, and she follows Jamie, and she follows Heather, and in my career, when my parents were alive, I got them all to the Super Bowls, went to 11 bowl games. They went to every bowl game, and my wife flew out to all the playoff games. It's been a wonderful experience. I have no complaints, except for certain people in the media.
Well, Bob, I'm happy I'm not one of those people. So with that being said, Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, no filter from the Wildcat. We're here every single month. Make sure you pay attention to Wake Up Call every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Time on mixlr.com, facebook.com, and youtube.com/wakeupcalldt. Once we go live, you'll find us in the archives. Go to wakeupcalldt.com, subscribe to our YouTube channel on youtube.com/wakeupcalldt, and search Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, or one word, Wake Up Call DT, on Amazon Music, Audible, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and Apple Podcasts, MixLR, TuneIn, Podbean, Podvine, Player FM, Spotify, Stitcher, and of course, once again, YouTube. With that being said, to the fantastic people here at the Wildcat Sports Pub, led by Danny and Heather Tome, I want to thank you all. I want to thank all of the wonderful team members here at the Wildcat, the Central and Upstate New York community for your support, the East Coast, the Midwest, and the West Coast for watching and listening to Wake Up Call. I cannot thank you enough. And, of course, around the world. I want to thank all of our listeners we've had in multiple countries around the world. So shout out to Canada, Mexico, Russia, China, Italy, Spain, England. Thank you. If I forgot anybody, my apologies, but I appreciate it so very much. With that being said, to the man that I appreciate, and to finally getting to do a show where I can put my hand on his shoulder, Bob Casullo. Shout out to the entire Casullo family. Thank you. Shout out to West Genesee, and big ups to everything that's up to come here this season, and to Jamie and the gang. Bob, as always, thank you very much for everything.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Always a pleasure.